Come fly with me. Each of the airplanes on this quilt represents some of my wonderful travels around this country. This is a sampler quilt, and we will see a whole array of samplers. You might also know it's unfinished. I bet you have some unfinished projects around the house. The fine points of quilting will be covered with the feathered star and the pine burr, all on today's show. Many quilts are being made across this country, and behind those quilts are quilters galore, men and women in guilds, at symposiums, at conventions, in quilt shops, and why, just look at the paraphernalia. These are just some of the trinkets and things that I've collected as I travel across this country. I've promised you a quilt dedicated to those many travels, and here it is, and I apologize. You will feel very comfortable this time because it is not finished. I know you have some unfinished projects also. The quilt concentrates on 12-inch blocks all the way around so that you could use this as any asymmetrical sampler. And in this large panel, I have given you a lesson in perspective. Now these are 30-inch squares all the way filled in with perspective with our 3-inch borders. We need to go to paper to get this exactly figured out. As always, you do your design a 30-inch square on paper. Now and you want to get your longest ruler or yardstick that you've got, I have decided that this will represent the lay of the land. I'm actually going to quilt the image of the airplane going across the land. And I have divided the rows into 6, 5, 4, 3, and 2. So naturally, as the land gets further away, it's getting smaller. So that makes sense. We know that we're going to be piecing this horizontally. Now, to divide our land, we are going to go back to this 6-inch division and then create that vanishing point. You're going to need an extra piece of paper along with your 30-inch square, and once that comes, we're going to go to the corner of our paper and then draw that all the way up. And then going to our next division, 6 inches, all the way across, look what's happening. All of a sudden, your land is making a mirror image from this side to this side, all the way up. And of course, you're probably thinking, oh dear, but look at all those templates. Well, I turn to the freezer paper again. And if you can look, here is row A. I have coded it. I've gone ahead and marked the grain line also, so that I can see exactly how I'm going to duplicate my rows. And of course, I changed the green, so I'd have quite an array of green shadings of the countryside as it's going across the land. That is how you would do your perspective. Angle will just create then. And of course, you will want to stagger your seams going one way in one row and then alternate them in the next row. Once that has been pieced, your final panel up here where I have flexicurved the purple Mountain Majesty is 10 inches by 30, and you can do just about anything you'd like to there, maybe an applique sunshine. Then if you'll look at that top row on our sampler quilt, you can get an array of a lot of our what I call vertical designs. And here, once again, I have relied on the freezer paper. You get an idea with the maple leaf in the first one, and of course that maple leaf represents Canada. I had an opportunity to fly and visit Calgary and the wonderful quilters in Calgary, Canada. And you can see the wonderful red that has been pieced just in those angles all the way across. We had a look at this in our maple leaf vest. The next one is the crescent moon. This could be in New Orleans, this could be in New York City, but you get a kind of a cityscape view and then the dark sky with that wonderful crescent moon inside. The next block along the top is a block that I did for Minnesota. Now, I looked up the state bird of Minnesota, and it happened to be the loon. And of course, the other definition for the loon, I think, represents several of my favorite friends up there, Connie, Wendy, Norma, and of course Helen Kelly. Just a little bit loony, but a lot of fun. And I wanted to show you, give you a little review of how we use that freezer paper. You can see that I'm on row D, and this has been drafted directly on from my original master on the freezer paper. I am then ready when I've cut out, this is sky, and notice how this is the overlapping part of the grass behind the loon. One portion is going to go to the next row, and that quite often happens when we're doing our design work. I will then take my waxy side and place it on my, because this is the sky, I'm going to place this on my piece that I have cut. Now remember, this is cut a ½ inch wider than what I have actually designed, because then that all of a sudden gives me that wonderful ¼ inch seam allowance on either side. And I'll position the green grass the same way, and just by anchoring that down with a dry iron, I can then take my cutter and making certain that I have some sort of a ruler that not only has a thick edge but has that ¼ inch indicator. I can then cut that off, come around and get the base of my sky, and then once more I will cut the top part. I find that it really helps to use your little pinky there to anchor the edge of that ruler, and it keeps it from sliding off. Same thing over here, and one more cut, and I can start thinking about lining up the notches that I've actually made on there. If you don't like that long angle, go ahead and give yourself a little cut, so you've got at least a ¼ inch from that portion right there. Then you're ready to sew these two together. Notice how you can then just line up the notches, and once again, if you want to put a pin right in that corner and make sure that it comes out exactly on the other side, but I think holding it up to the light on a sunny day gives you that best look-see. Then you're ready to start your sewing. I would go all the way out to the raw edge, sew right next to the paper line. You don't want to sew on it because you might want to reuse it, and that line or that cut edge is exactly where your seam line should go. Once that's been done, and you don't need to backstitch because that will be going over again. Oh, that's just wonderful. It got right next to it. You can just see, and then you can just slowly pull that away, and you've got that perfect seam line. It's going to be all ready to put the rest of that row together. Now, I want to take you back to the quilt a minute and pull off my, what I call my EGA block, Embroiderers Guild of America, a group of ladies that concentrate on many forms of needlework. This particular block is for the Atlanta chapter, the Dogwood chapter. I've spent some time teaching them quilting, and they are a busy group. Last time I was there, the ladies were doing needlepoint covers for the governor's mansion, the chairs in the dining room, and they are a very involved group. I have done both this block and the other block with the letters with a Celtic bar, the bias, and I wanted to review that with you. This particular block is the National Extension Homemakers Council. I've had some trips in Kentucky and also in Louisiana. They're a very active group across this country. They're the ones you call when your jelly is either too thin or too thick. You dial the panic number and they will help you out. Let's review the Celtic bar and exactly how that works. You can, of course, buy store-bought bias, but as quilters, we get a little bit spoiled. We like to make our own colors and use them. See how you can cut this about 1 3/8 wide, and then with a bias bar, you can simply slip this in, and notice how the seam is then formed to the back side. Press that, and the steam then anchors that down. Once that has been anchored, and you can do miles of this, then by simply appliquing this on, you get a nice finished product. This represents the thimble and the needle, and I need to make an opening there for the eye of the needle. Let's review adding our mitered borders. Once, of course, you take and mark all of your blocks, whether they're pieced or appliqued, with a 12-inch square, giving you that exact 1/4 inch on all 4 sides, you're ready to add your 3.5-inch cut borders. The secret there is to sew exactly to just, not the raw edge, but exactly to the turn, that inside 1/4 inch turn. Then by extending each of your borders straight, you would then cut that off so you get a perfect, and I sometimes like to let that go straight, and then that edge of this border becomes an exact guide to trim that off. Once that has been done, you have a perfect overlapping right angle. Put the two right sides together, and then by holding that, you are then ready and in the right position to, with a straight edge, draw a line from exactly where you stopped back stitching to the outside edge. And I would always start stitching right there, back stitch, and come all the way out. Now, our next block is a wonderful friend, and that represents the little friend here, the Pelican. If you can get a good look at the Pelican with the sunshine coming down over his bill, he represents Florida. I had a marvelous tour of Florida, and I think of Grace and Tallahassee and Jean's Quilting Cabin and some great people down there, and of course a pelican is very appropriate for that state. Below that is the 5-pointed star, our Texas star. When I think of Texas, I think of the Houston Quilt Market, and I think of the festival. Remember our 5-pointed star with my Seeing Stars quilt, very intricate in the center. Once you have found the midpoint, we want to draw our 72-degree angle, and after that has been done all the way around 5 times, then divide that. Then by connecting those points, all of a sudden you have your 5-pointed star. Now you could leave that a seam, couldn't you? But we run into problems as quilters piecing that many seams. In order to avoid that, I went ahead and where this is crossed over, just form the pentagon, and I think that helps a lot. With that anchored in place, I want to show you the sequence in piecing this. You would go from one star, and we can pretend he's the head. That would be sewn on. We would then go ahead and sew the next star to the background, attach that. The next star, well, let's think of that as the arm. Wait for the leg. The next star, attach that, that's the other arm. Then we have one leg attached to the background, and then 2 backgrounds, and you're all the way done. One fell swoop and your star is done. I wanted to spend just a minute on the airplane and show you that there are 11 pieces with those, 72, and that was a long session. I could almost do this with my eyes closed, I think, but it really is easy to do. It's a matter of sewing 2 triangles, 2 wings on either side, and each time do the licky finger routine and then take advantage of those right angles. Sew that, and then you'd be sewing that, and then add that last piece on, and then that would attach to the body of the airplane. I wanted to also highlight the eagle. You can see the eagle is for my travels out west. It's not only a 16-inch block, but also a 12-inch block. And now for a coat to go with my travels. Perhaps you remember the gypsy dress. I have made a tinker's coat that will carry me all across the country because it's got all the sewing apparatus and quilting gear to go with it. It says, "Have machine, will travel." The very last word at the bottom of the coat says, "occasionally." It has been machine quilted, and I would encourage you to try that. I have a sample to kind of give you an idea of what you can do with machine quilting that's very creative. This camisole top has batting in it. I have gone ahead and followed the outline of the print fabric and created a design on the outside, almost an exact, well, it is an exact image of the print itself. If you're going to do machine quilting, you will need some sort of a narrow hoop. Even a pinch hoop will work. Once you have taken that apart, put the larger part of your hoop on the bottom and then the smaller part inside. Now I want to go around perhaps that flower. Once I have positioned that, and of course you don't need any pins or basting, the basting would get in the way of your darning foot. If your machine will darn, you can do machine quilting. Then lower your feed dogs. Once those are dropped, that allows you to determine the length of the stitch that you want. I like to always take the top thread and with one turn pull up that bobbin thread, and once that has been pulled up, and making sure that the needle has always on top of where that thread has come out, and with your back hand gear down, in other words, your tension has to be engaged, then you are ready to start. I like to stitch up and down initially to lock those threads into place. Then I can take that anywhere I want to. After I've gone just a ways, I will come and release those initial threads so that they're not going to get tangled in any of the work that you're doing. But just take that anywhere. Follow that all the way around that rose, making an image of the exact print that's going to come out on the back side. When you've come around to the rose, go up and down in place and lock that once again. And you can see the outline of the flower. This is Grace Anderson's quilt entitled The Flowers That Bloom in the Spring, a quilt worthy of its own coordinated bag. I can't think of enough flowery words in the dictionary to describe the beauty of this quilt. She has done just a beautiful job. It is based on 12 blocks that are 20 inches square, the largest piece being an octagon, which is a print in the center of the quilt. Notice how Grace has even positioned that print so it's the same, not only in the octagon, but in the corner triangles. You can see how she's just positioned that flower to already create a new design. Now, in order to piece this block, you need to, as always, go down to the smallest sections. I would recommend getting the corners done first. And in order to do that, I would form these rectangles in each corner that are made up of two squares that, of course, have two triangles in them. Then go ahead and add your extra triangle and your diamond shape, and that section would be completed. Do the same thing on the other side, but this time add an extra square. Go ahead and get your corners done, and notice that Grace did break that down into a print and a trapezoid. Once those are done, then I would sew this section to that, and then this will go all across with one fell swoop. The corners being done, I would then concentrate on this area right in here, knowing that it has to be completed, including that little triangle there and there, which can then be sewn to these triangles that are attached to the octagon. Then you can attach this on either side, and the last triangle you have to set in will have to be coming down here, stop, backstitch, take it off the machine, and start again here. It is a beautiful quilt, and once you get that block done, you only have 11 more to do. Good luck on this one, ladies. I have been sent a marvelous selection of old-timey diamonds from a Mrs. Graff in Arkansas, and she was so nice to share these with us. She believes they were done in Japan because it was sent to her from some missionary people. Notice that the fabric has been basted on paper, and then the English method of whip stitching those little diamonds together. Aren't you glad we do American piecework? I'd also like to feature in this fine point section OddFellows Chain done by Sue Knipple. She's from Winston-Salem, and even her stationery claims quilts are not just for remembering, but for reliving their making. This wall hanging is, of course, made up of a lot of triangles, and we can refer here to our parallel lines that have been placed with pencil and then sewn on either side. So it's just a matter of splicing those apart and then cutting those open, and with that double sewing on either side, we create our squares that, of course, can be then sewn together going into our whole pattern. OddFellows Chain. The pine burr has also been a favorite pattern of mine, and after piecing this, I thought, oh no, have I got problems. All on these inside sections, I had a tiny one and then I had a big one. I was not happy with that block. So we have redesigned this block and come up with an answer. We have eliminated that little piece, made this center section a little bit larger so that we can actually pull that right up to a yellow and forget about that extra misshaped piece right there. Now, in order to do any of these sections or these blocks that have elongated points on them, you first of all have to do some thinking. You just can't go to the machine and not put the mind to working. It needs to be thinking. I would concentrate on units first. And you do establish something that I almost refer to as your kite, because you want to position these all in the same manner. Once you've set this one at the machine, then you can see the next one's going to follow suit all the way down. And once these are sewn, get that master template going. Nowhere in this block is there a rectangle because you didn't use that to cut it out, but yet you do need that rectangle to check. Once that has been pressed back to the dark side and cut apart, you can line that up and make certain that that does form the rectangle. That will allow you to go on further and piece just this much, which is then sewn to this side. Then you can come on further and sew that piece to that, and then that can sew all the way across. Across that section did have that triangle sewn to it. So you get a beautiful pattern and have eliminated some of the problems that happened there. I have a wonderful log cabin quilt to share with you. Soon this quilt will be in the hands of a raffle winner, and I'm so excited to share it with you. It is a log cabin quilt, and you remember this is the courthouse steps block, but it is special in that it's not only a scrap quilt done by a lot of guild members, but notice that one touch of maroon and then that array of tan and burgundy that all come together to form a strong unit. I think the quilting stitches, contrary lines over the log cabin, also make this a very successful quilt. Samplers abound all over this country, even Hawaii. From our New York Liberty trip, let's go to our Hawaiian quilter. And tell us, what was the inspiration for doing the Liberty acknowledgement? What got you going?
Well, maybe as a stepping stone, the guild that I belong to, the Hawaii Stitch and Fiber Arts Guild, we were invited to make a flag for the Fairfield Fashion Show.
Yes.
And a group of 6 of us made, one person designed it and I coordinated the making of it. And I embroidered the state motto along the bottom in Hawaiian. And then from that I heard about the quilt and I was just revved up to sew.
Yes,
and I had
the needle was hot, right?
Right, and sharp. And
yes.
I had the space of, you know, ahead. I had the time for the first time in my life to really indulge and just go
yes.
ahead and design and
well, everyone
do that.
we've talked to has mentioned that they took a lot of time to think it out
Yes.
and even played on paper.
Yes.
And I can see the results in this show. I think that made a big difference.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I'm drawn to yours because it has a sampler kind of a theme to it, and then the overlay. What did you use for the overlay?
The overlay is transparent nylon organza and it's woven. It's not knitted. As somebody
yes.
said, I hope it doesn't run, but it's woven.
Yes.
And I wanted to use modern fabrics as well because
yes.
we have to
yes.
experiment.
And then tell me about the writing on your quilt. I noticed there were words.
Well, I was looking at the competition nationwide, and I live, even though I'm living in Hawaii, we have a melting pot of different people from different ethnic groups. In fact, all my neighbors are Japanese, or
yes.
you know,
yes.
from Japanese heritage.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought I wanted to represent the origins of as many immigrant people that I could, and that took. I only managed to find 30. And again, I don't know how I would
And does it all say
in.
liberty? The words say liberty?
It says the word freedom.
Freedom.
So I have it in pure English on the top right-hand corner. Top left, it's Latin, libertas,
yes.
and it's freedom in everyone. In fact, one Japanese journalist was delighted to see her own script there.
Oh, that's wonderful.
But,
that way it relates to so many people.
I hope so.
The colors also, you had a nice thought about the colors. Tell us that.
Well, I was thinking about the whole of the very fragile, precious environment that we live in and that we must protect. So from the bottom, I pure water, fertile, rich land, and free, pure air. And if we can hang on to that, we have the basis
yes.
of
Thank you.
a good life.
We appreciate the time you spent with us. Thank you. Now, closer to home, it's a real privilege for me to feature Penny Wortman and her mother-in-law, Alice Wortman's quilts. I want you to study all these samplers and see exactly how they've placed the sampler blocks. Notice the color arrangement they have chosen and their border treatment. I think they've tied them all together so beautifully. In Penny's quilt, you notice that she has a Pennsylvania Dutch feeling in her applique work in the center, and then this rail fence block, that's an old favorite, but notice how it's changed with the feather wreath quilting design. Look up above, here's another log cabin, but we hardly recognize it because it's got almost a snail motif quilted with radiating lines. Another quilt of Penny's, I think, has such an unusual color selection. That touch of lavender with that brown does something special. These are her very own blocks, and they're a little bit larger. They're 16-inch. Notice how she has a green stripe border around each one, and then that is inserted with the brown. That one has a maple leaf border all around the outside. Her mother-in-law, Alice, has taken some of those very same blocks, but notice how it's changed. Tan in the border and then brown around each block. And then it's set off with just rectangles for the outside edge. I think that does a lot also. Now, hasn't Alice done a scrumptious job? Oh my goodness. And of course, as we've always said, ladies, when in doubt, quilt. Look at those feather wreath motifs and then just the simple cross-hatching on the outside. Oh, here's an old favorite, Ocean Waves. I remember this block. And then here's a quilt that Alice has in progress. And of course, we like to see those that aren't finished also, but this is going to be spectacular. This whole quilt is based on stars. She started out her center panel with just diamonds, heavy quilting. She's taken advantage of border prints, and then lots of star patterns. Mexican star up here. The border treatment is very nice. And I want you to see, get you a closer look. Look at the border diagonal quilting. So simple, but yet so meaningful. I like that little touch of coral that comes in to play with those brown rust colors. This is going to be so beautiful. We look forward to seeing you next week, and our show then is going to be based on an old-time favorite, sometimes called the schoolhouse, but we're calling it the homestead pattern. Tune in. We look forward to seeing you. Thank you for being with us today.
Lap Quilting with Georgia Bonesteel is made possible by grants from Family Circle, the world's largest selling women's magazine. Ginger Incorporated, makers of scissors and shears for home and industry. And VIP Fabrics, a division of Cranston Printworks Company, America's oldest textile printer. Georgia Bonesteel is the author of Georgia's New Ideas for Lap Quilting, published by Oxmoor House and available in libraries and bookstores nationwide.